Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to the next live session of Avid Online. For those who are joining us for the first time, a very special welcome. Please refer to the chat box for more information on Avid Learning, our platform, and our partners for this evening. As the pandemic struck, we shifted gears and started our online platform, Avid Online. And in 2 years, we've hosted over 500 programs attempting to bring you the best of arts and culture. Staying true to our mantra as always that learning never stops, we have organized discussions, workshops, masterclasses, performances, and much more to support the country's creative community and foster dialogue within the arts ecosystem. To continue this dialogue, I welcome you to today's session presented by the Consulate General of Switzerland in Mumbai and Avid Learning. Cartooning for Social Change is an online presentation and discussion to unfold the importance of comics as an inviting medium to engage in complex conversations and sensitive topics. The impetus of this discussion started when I got an email from our partners, the Swiss Consulate, introducing us to Patrick's work and himself. So to begin, I'd like to invite the Consul General of Switzerland in Mumbai, Mr. Ottmar Hadiger, to say a few words. Consul General?
Thank you very much, Mr. Lalci, and ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Swiss Consulate in Mumbai, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. And I'm glad that you find time and also interest for today's session. We are delighted to partner with Avid Learning for this virtual event. Avid Learning has become an essential culture platform here in Mumbai, and not only, be it with physical events or like in the last 2 years with online sessions. Therefore, Avid Learning is an ideal and valued partner for us. The almost 75-year-old friendly relations between Switzerland and India may have many facets. We cherish, of course, substantial relations in fields such as investment, trade, innovation, science, education, and environment. The cultural exchange is an equally important part of our activity of the Consulate General and also of the entire official Swiss network in India. Art and culture, bringing people together, are a strong link between our nations. Looking at the world today, it seems to me that people-to-people diplomacy is more than ever needed for the better understanding between nations and cultures. I'm grateful to Asad and Avid Learning for today's projects and the opportunity to present Patrick Chappatte, a Swiss cartoonist, to the Indian audience. He is somehow the grand master of Swiss cartoons, and his works can be found in reputed newspapers and magazines in Switzerland and abroad. Already in 2018, Mr. Chappatte has visited Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, and Ahmedabad for a series of debates and lectures that has been in the framework of the 70 years of friendship between Switzerland and India. The online format today allows him to join the discussion with a distinguished group of Indian cartoon artists and authors. And it will happen in a very eco-friendly way and nicely also accessible to an audience across India. I'm personally a fan of cartoons. It's a powerful art medium, and that is also accessible to everyone in everyday life. It provokes reflection and very often, of course, smiles or laugh. Cartoons have the ability to reduce complex issues into a simpler and concise form. And it is like a universal language that everyone understands and at the end also connect us all. 5 carefully selected experts and the highly interested topic promise a stimulating round of talks. And I'm very much looking forward to it. And of course, at the end also to an animated Q&A with our audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Consul General, and allow me to introduce our evening speakers. Cartoonist and founder, World Comics India, Sharad Sharma, visual artist, Ita Mehrotra, filmmaker and comic writer, Arthy Parthasarathy, and editorial cartoonist and comic reporter, Patrick Chappatte, who will be in conversation with our moderator, who is a regular contributor of Avid Learning, author Varud Gupta. For more about each of our speakers, please refer to their very impressive bios that have been posted in the chat section. They should have been emailed to you earlier. This conversation will dwell into the democratization of the art of comic making and how this art form can be used to create memorable, thought-provoking social commentary that influences and reflects public opinion. Please note the session will last about 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A, in which Varud will be taking questions. So don't wait till the end. Start posting them in the Q&A box throughout. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Varud, and look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. I have to say that I am particularly very excited about this discussion. Not only because of the immense talent here, but because I think every one of our panelists is going to offer a new representation of what it actually means to be working in comics, working in cartoons, and generally this medium. I know particularly when I was working on Chotu, the graphic novel, I fought against a great stigma in India to explain what it was that we were creating together. For few that understood it as an illustrated book, they assumed it was simply for children. And along those lines, I think there was a lot of confused people in the audience. So I'm very excited that each of the people here today are going to help me, from political cartoons to animations to graphic novels, help define what it means to work in cartoons, comics, this general medium, and hopefully the nature of storytelling and social issues this work can come to illuminate. With that, we're going to start off brief introductions on what has been the journey to this medium and why. My journey as a writer began through food and travel. And somewhere along the way, I ended up living in Delhi. And it was in Delhi, wrecked with two thoughts in my mind. One was, what is the idea of freedom? What does freedom mean to different people? And how does someone even small create change in the world? And it was with those two ideas that I came to the idea of the book Chotu, which would be panel 3. So yeah, that was the idea. And this is my first time working in a graphic comic medium. On the next page, you can see an example of one of the panels. The idea was it was born from 1947, the events of the partition. Can you do the next slide, please? Yeah, perfect. So this is, you can see, a speech of Nehru, very much inspired by not only the art of the time, but also taking a bit of humor and social issues on what was 1947 and what's the ramifications for society in today's India. And on the next slide, you can see somewhere along the way, I just fell in love with the graphic comic medium and do my best whenever I find the time to contribute to magazines such as Comic Sense. I'm going to now invite Ita to give a little bit of introduction.
Thanks, Varud, and thank you to the Avid Learning team and the Swiss Consulate for organizing this and bringing us together today. It's really exciting to talk about and look at how different comics makers and graphic novelists and cartoonists are working. I think that's really how, in India at least, we learn what to do with the form, is to engage with what other people are doing with it and keep looking at the work that others are doing. So I'm really excited about today's discussion as well. Quickly to kind of take you through what I do very quickly, it's working actually within very different ways as an artist, from doing community education programs within urban low-resource, low-income group areas, as well as in village schools in remote parts of the country. So actually working as an educationist. Where comics and graphic narratives is one of the mediums through which I work with children and young people. And then also creating nonfiction reportage comics myself. And I kind of somewhere feel that as an artist, it's actually really important for me to work in very different capacities, and that there's no reason to be doing any one particular thing alone. And somewhere along the lines, the work within, the education space informs the work that I do within research and graphic narratives of my own, and vice versa. Just to show you quickly a little bit of the kind of work that I'm doing. So I wanted to share some of the kind of recent work. One is, of course, this book. This is my first book. It came out about exactly a year ago in the summer of 21. And it was what I sat with through the lockdown time in India. This is from the experience of participating and supporting the, huge, immense movement against the communal laws that the Indian government was has brought into place, the CAA, that further marginalizes the Muslim population and denies citizenship to Muslim immigrants. So women in India, Muslim women in India, took to the streets and really rallied against this communalization of the country. And like many of a lot of my work, it's born out of experience from being within mass movements, within democratic struggles for human rights, and often around the experience of women leaders or women in protest. And so like this, it was, women taking over not just the question of what democracy should mean, but also in that process, the ownership of public space. Because literally there were protests in the middle of highways and public spaces where Muslim women were saying, no more, are we going to hold back, but we're going to take over these spaces. So the visual presencing of that kind of protest was really strong. And for me, it was, of course, first to noticing these, visually, but also then presencing it in drawing. If you can move to the next slide. Yeah, and comics, of course, in this case for me is a way to, of course, present the larger, event that's unfolding. And there was a lot of reportage of the anti-CAA protests, but it's also a way to enter micro revolutions within that larger struggle. So if you move to the next slide. So while there are images in the book that are of this kind of larger event that happens and there's thousands of people rallying in support, there's also these folds of the conversations with various perspectives, from somebody who's really old and is spending nights out at the street, to a person who's, in their like late 20s and is working as an architect, as a designer, around the corner from where the protests are happening, and is going to the protest every evening after their work, and is also imagining, being Muslim, being young in India, what India is for them as they grow, right? So what that question of citizenship is. So for me, this graphic narrative, having the length of a book, having this medium, meant that I can bring together myriad perspectives and not flatten those out. There's this kind of play between differences, between divergent and sometimes even opposing views, and letting that tension hold through in the process, that is very kind of engaging for me, even as a creator. And I feel doesn't get lost even after the production. It's not ending up as one painting that's now found its conclusion. So so this is a book length, which also gives space to be able to work through, different voices. If you move to the next. Yeah, so the book was, of course, a lot of different people involved, this production process and designing, and it took over 2 years. And it's been very interesting after it, what's happened with the book. And I hope I can share that ahead. But I also do smaller projects through, grants, and also for magazines and exhibitions. And this was one through a small grant by the Goethe Institute in Bangalore. And the Sandbox Collective and Art Collective. And I focused, which is another kind of interest of mine with comics, is to look at life and being through a feminist lens. And undo and tackle questions of social order as being a hegemonic, heteronormative, patriarchal. And often it's a slightly based on, again, experiential, first-hand things that happen in everyday life in Delhi. And one of these was, this little comic called Drawing Home, which is a zine. I also like to play with how comics are published and what they end up as. So not just books and, in one place, but can it be little handouts? Can it just be taken away when people leave an exhibition space? So this was based on a semi-autobiographical, what is the idea of home? What is stability, and how much that still rests on this heteronormative understanding of family and marriage. And again, this playful tension between like how much you say and how much you don't say is something that comics are able to do with me. So there is hard hitting non-fictional elements to it, but also it doesn't end there. There's a lot of play with what you're saying, and I think that's important to be engaging and invite in the person who's reading. If you move to the next. Yeah, so this is similarly, it's autobiographical. It's based on, also the experience of being within a single parent home and what that means for the lenses with which you look at the world. So somebody who's cooking and also having to do housework and what that negotiation is. And this is also from looking at what comics makers across time have done in across the world, of examining personal politics towards tackling much larger issues. And that's the work that women comics makers and queer people across the world have taken to this form to do. And I really respect and look at that for the work that I do. Yeah, you can move on. I just quickly want to wrap up by also saying this kind of community education drives that I do. I run an organization called Outreach India, where we work with children and young people and women within under-resourced spaces in cities as well as village and community schools to look at what it is that art, especially storytelling and creating original graphic narratives, visual stories, can do to find a personal voice to express what's happening around changes, political questions, questions of identity. And yeah, maybe we can talk later about what happens when exhibitions of these happen or communities gather to look at issues such as problems of water or sanitation through comics drives like this. Yeah, and I think there's connections between what others do within this. So this is, yeah, and I think the various ways of working relate to each other. Um, and I think that's where I'll end here and maybe carry on in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ita. It's truly inspirational, the work that you do. Can I invite Arthy now to give us an introduction?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you to Avid Learning as well as the Consulate for inviting us. I'm sorry, I am a writer, but I sometimes struggle with articulation and I'm a bit awkward, so excuse that part of it. But yeah, so I'm a filmmaker and writer based in Bangalore. I guess, like Ita said, in our practice, we have to wear multiple hats, and that's something I find myself doing as well. So I run a studio called Falana Films, and we've been around for the last 8 years working with film and animation specifically with social change, and we try to take on projects that tackle these kind of issues and concerns. And in comics, I think I kind of entered this medium almost accidentally, and as you will see, but it's been a passion of mine that's only grown. So maybe the best way to tell is to show. So if Sagar, you could share the presentation. So yeah, I think how it started is I love comics and I wanted to make them, but I do draw, but not very well. I know a lot of people say there's no such thing as bad drawing, but I mean, I feel like if you saw mine, then you would probably dispute that point. But I started kind of with this found imagery. I was very inspired by an artist called David Malky, who makes this comic called Wonder Mark in America, in which he uses kind of found imagery and collage and mostly historical vintage images, and he remixes them in interesting ways. So that's where it started. And this was about 7 years ago. And there was this kind of growing awareness about women's issues, and I wanted to kind of talk about it in my own way, and that's where this started. If you could move on to the next slide. So this continued for over 3 years. That it was a weekly comic, and I found a kind of different things, different ways to work with images and different issues to talk about. And that's kind of how it started. And along the way, we also, managed to make some animated comics and experiment with different ways with this. If you could go on to the next slide. And at that time, I also, started writing. This was actually one of my first published pieces. I normally collaborate with artists. This was with Kaveri Gopalakrishnan, and this was for a publication by Captain Bijli Comics. And the story is about when Section 377 was struck down, but then reinstated, and how that kind of impacted the queer community in India. If you could go to the next slide. And for this one, I collaborated with Oindri. And this was basically a story about a queer couple. But one half of that couple is a football coach, an ex-India level footballer who found it difficult to make a living of coaching. And we thought, that was an interesting story. And here was one of the times in which film played a role. So because we were working on this piece remotely, I interviewed everyone in the story, and it actually came from that process of filmmaking. If you could go to the next slide. And with Oindri, we also, we made these short pieces about, different things that we were talking and thinking about, like this one on caste, which was submitted for the Guardian Comics contest. If you could go to the next slide. So through this process of us, collaborating, I was collaborating with different artists, mostly women. And what we did is we came together to form the Kadak Collective. And at that time, it was kind of women and queer led. And now I think it's opened out to a lot more. But yeah, at that time, 8 of us came together to make this collective and to kind of make work under that umbrella. So if you could go to the next slide. So we, worked on, this is for a project called Gender Bender run by Sandbox Collective. So all of us came together to make pieces about, about different kind of, each person, of course, had their own kind of story and what they wanted to talk about. And we kind of put it together under one umbrella. And we started something called the Reading Room, and we started kind of collating these pieces and publishing them as zines and having the library travel around. If you could go to the next slide. Another comic that we worked on during this process was this one called Aloe Vera and the Void. I worked with Renuka Raji. And this piece was about the trans community and their belief in God and how that they navigate that. And then most recently, in 2019, we came together to do a much larger project, which is the Bystander Anthology, which was 50 plus artists from 11 countries, but all of South Asian origin came together to make a set of work on the theme of the bystander, which we found, very interesting at that point. But later, through the pandemic, it gained even more relevance because everyone, in a way, was a bystander. So this was then completed just last year in 2021. So yeah, that's my journey.
Yep, perfect. Thank you. As someone who also writes but can't draw, I would absolutely disagree. I do think there's something as a bad drawing because I've seen many and created many of them myself. But thank you, Arthy. I love the issues that you deal with. Patrick, could I please invite you for an introduction?
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for having me. I am delighted to be in Mumbai for the second time. First time was in person, I must say. It was much more fun. We did indeed in 2018 a tour of 5 cities and 4 conferences I think in 5 days. But as everyone knows, India is a small country, so it was not a big deal. And I could see on this occasion the diversity and challenges of the political cartooning scene in India, and that was very, very interesting. And I'm also, again, very delighted to be with creators and to meet you guys and to see your work. Very inspiring, very interesting. I'm going to show you, talking about diversity, I'm going to show you a few political cartoons. So that's to illustrate that aspect of the power of the image. And then in the ensuing conversation, I can also talk as a comics journalist, because that's my other hat. I have different hats as a creator. One of them, what I do mostly is political cartoons. Right now, I work for the Boston Globe, Der Spiegel in Germany, Le Canard Enchaîné in France, and Swiss media Le Temps and Neue Zürcher Zeitung. And I used to work for the International Herald Tribune and then the New York Times for almost 20 years. And that's until 2019 when the New York Times decided to stop all political cartooning. That's something we can talk about later. But maybe I'm going to show you quickly some of my works, if you can bring this up. Okay, that's a simple image, a very recent one. You can guess it was made about the war in Europe, the war in Ukraine. And it's one of those very simple symbolic images that can really jump across boundaries, across cultures. Everyone can understand this image. You understand it with your gut, even before you process it with your brain. This was published first in Le Temps in Geneva, and it has been reprinted in Germany, in the Washington Post and other newspapers. So not all of my cartoons are that visual and that simple, but I guess those are the ones that I tend to prefer because they don't need much explanations. Let's pick another one. I'm not sure you can see the whole picture, but this is another take on the war in Ukraine, and this time getting more to the side of humor after a few days of this tragedy breaking out in February 24. After a few days of very somber cartoons like the one you saw just before, I allowed myself to do some, cartoons on the lighter side with some humor, and I think that's what we always need in all situations. It's this touch of humor. Let's go to the next one. Another simple but somber cartoon to sum up those 2 years we have all gone through. Really 2 very special years in the history of the planet. The eclipse of our lives, that was COVID, an experience that was both very personal and universal at the same time. And for 2 years, there was mostly one topic for a political cartoonist, and that was COVID. And it engulfed all the other topics, of course, society, politics, the economy. Let's pick another cartoon. This is another cartoon about COVID, but being more specific about the divide in access to health between the North and the South. And finally, I'm going to share another very visual, very simple cartoon about climate change, pollution, you name it, any toxic activity caused by human behavior. And just showing that simple image to underline how simple is actually difficult. To come up with this image, I did what I do every day when I get to work as a political cartoonist. I give myself 2 hours, and then I do different sketches. I go into different directions, metaphors, reflections, ideas, visual ideas, commentary. And I try to come up with different ways to express what I want to express, through humor, through a simple image. And I had been working for an hour and a half or 45 minutes, and I was not happy with myself. And I got kind of desperate, and I thought there must be a really simple way to express what I want to express. And then I came up with this image. So this very visual, simple image is actually the work of suffering, of 2 hours suffering, looking for ideas. Simple is actually difficult. That's my little presentation of cartoons. I am mostly a political cartoonist here now in Geneva. I used to live in New York and Los Angeles. I've been also for the last 20 years a graphic journalist, or how do you call it? Comics reporter, comics journalist. There are many words for it. I have another website, which is graphicjournalism.com. And I did over 30 stories, magazine style, where I really go on the ground and I report using the technique of comics. So I did that in the slums of Nairobi. I did that in Gaza at the end of the 2009 war. I did this in death row prisons in the United States. Every time I get a chance to get away from my drawing desk and see the nuances of the world, because political cartooning is really black and white, and then comics reportage is getting to the thousands of grays, to the nuances of reality. And my my drawing style is different when I do comics reportage, because this is all about what I see, also what I feel when I am on the ground. And this very often challenges my vision as a political cartoonist working from Geneva. Voila. And apart from this, I've been doing for the last 20 years, with the help of Swiss missions and consulates and embassies, a project called Crossed Pens. It's crossed-pens.com, and that is working with political cartoonists and artists in countries of conflict to come together and create a project together. And then I am also the president of the Freedom Cartoonist Foundation in Geneva, whose honorary chair was Kofi Annan. And we award an international political cartoon award every 2 years in Geneva to salute not only the talent, but the courage of cartoonists. And last award was this year on May 3, 2022. And we had the immense privilege of having the 2 Nobel Peace Laureates, Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov. Those are 2 journalists who were distinguished this year. It's the first time since 86 years that journalists have received the Nobel Peace. They came to Geneva and they handed our cartoon award to our 2 winners from Hungary and Ukraine. So it was a beautiful day for cartooning.
Amazing. Thank you, Patrick. I think your work is truly fantastic. I'm going to invite now Sharad. Please, can you give us a little bit of introduction about yourself?
Hi, thanks. So, yeah, thanks, Patrick. I was just thinking about my days working as a political cartoonist long back. Now, political cartooning is something I think the cartoonists, especially the political cartoonists, are endangered species in India and vanishing very fast. Very few you can count on your fingertips. But unfortunately, there is not much appetite for the humor and satire nowadays in India. And what is really happening nowadays that most of the cartoonists are independent. They are freelancers. They are publishing their own stuff on social media or their own Facebook pages and so on. There are less and less full-time cartoonists, or newspaper has stopped hiring them as a full-time staff. So they are on their own. You need to create on your own. You need to publish on your own. You need to earn on your own and also survive. So I think it's a difficult time, but it's again, I think, I don't know when you visited India, but now it's last few years also not easy for all sorts of humor, satire in India. So, I mean, I've been creating on and off, and especially when I was invited for this talk, I was just thinking from my organization perspective, the organization which I established almost 20 years back, World Comics India, and promoting grassroots comics, this innovative idea that how this medium, especially the comics, can be used as a powerful communication tool, as a medium for the self-expression. And working in mainstream press as a political cartoonist as well as a development journalist myself, what I realized, I used to work in print media and later on switched to television and to internet web medium later on. But traveling across the country, in this country, especially a country like size of a continent, it's so difficult to see the real stories getting their space or due space in the mainstream press. And unfortunately, if it is out of sight, it's out of mind of the policymakers as well. They are not really creating any ripples in any parliament debate as well. So anyways, I left my mainstream media job as a political cartoonist, and I do some stuff on and off. But what I started doing is started going to the people, and especially in India, when I remember one of my editor in newspaper asked me why we are doing political cartooning, and I had no answers. We are doing it because it's a British legacy. That's all. We have no answer otherwise. Now you look back few years back, I mean, most of the stuff we had in newspaper or anywhere else which really exists is related to only the political stories, development or current affairs. But there is no as such like social cartooning. There is no as such something which is connected to the life of the common people. So long back, 20 years back when we started, when I was just traveling, drawing and meeting people, spending time with those people living in conflict regions in India, especially with 100 rupees in my pocket long back in 95, I traveled to northeastern state and stayed there over a month. And I realized that the stories and the real issues are really not appearing. What is really happening over there is only the story of the curfew or the bomb blast gets space in the mainstream press or so-called mainstream press. But otherwise, the stories of the people living in 7 states never used to get any space in those newspaper or television. So what was really lacking was the narrative, which only the noisy minority used to sit in television studios and creating their narrative in the morning, and then they are also getting published in all the newspapers in the same way. And that was very unfortunate thing for a country like India, which speaks so many languages and diverse sort of culture and everything, and issues and problem and everything. So the way we did it, we started going to people and said, okay, if you have a story to share, please draw that. And imagine telling these things to people where the 11 bomb blast in last 1 week, and then you have curfew situation and so on. People used to laugh at us. But this is also something where people realize that their stories, maybe this is an opportunity to document their stories and maybe self-publish it in some way. And this is what we provided in a way that you need to come together, share your story, self-publish it in a way that it is not supported by any funding agency or NGOs. But if you have a paper, pencil and pen and something to say, you can create your comic. And this reproduction part was very simple in grassroots comics, using A4 size paper and going to the photocopy shop, and then you self-publish 15-20 copies and distribute it locally. So this was like local creation, local yes, as you can see in the photograph. Thank you, Saga. The creators were people who have probably never ever pulled pencil in their life. They have never heard the word called comics. Or if you will, tomorrow you will take any mainstream comics there and say, okay, this is the comic book look-alike. They will say, no, it is not the comics. The comics is like a 4-frame wall poster grassroots comics. So I have my community is all across the South Asia and also in other part of the globe now. But these are the people who have never ever created anything, but they are very proud creator. They come to these workshops, they publish their own stuff, they make photocopies and they paste it around in in a shop like this, or trees, lampposts, meeting places, or anywhere they think it is really important, and people will come and they will talk about their issues. So what started happening over the period of time, that the local stories, the local language content, and please also remember that in India we have this fashionable graphic novel culture, which is only for the English speaking audience. There is very few superhero stories available in Hindi or some other languages. But unfortunately, what we are still producing most of the English language stuff. So what is really happening in these workshops, more than 100,000 people now we have trained. So we have equal amount of comics created by these people. Imagine, in all sorts of language, from Mizo to Hindi to Tamil to Urdu, everything, everywhere, local language content is started emerging everywhere. And that is also not just self-published by the local people. Sometimes they are also making this kind of like compilations, where we have the compilation on breaking the stereotypes of the northeastern state people. So whenever it comes to like grassroots comics, people think about it is only about the people living in far-flung off areas or marginalized communities or illiterate people. But it is not something is only limited to those people. But the way we are doing this, like teaching comic journalism to the development communication and mass communication student in more than 20 universities, and also including Lucerne University and Zurich University there in Switzerland. So it's interesting that how this comic stories started emerging, and these stories were combined and they were published in anthologies and made available for the larger audience across the globe. Now imagine the homeless people drawing their stories, and these stories are going to the Supreme Court, High Court judges, to the member of parliament, to the people who really matters there. So maybe they are ignoring their application, but they are not going to ignore the comics created by these people. And then the recent workshop with the Rohingyas communities, and another one which I did very recently with the nomadic tribes in Rajasthan, that how they were declared as a criminal tribes in India, and they are now started documenting their story. So it's a beautiful medium, which was unfortunately used earlier only to tell the superhero stories or the mythological stories and so on. But the way this grassroots comics movement is now going on, with more than 10,000 trainers across the globe. Also, some of them in Switzerland, they did few workshops during the pandemic in different cities there. So it's a beautiful copyleft movement, and this is what we are doing with the comics. I was just thinking while my co-panelist was showing some of this stuff, it was a quick reminder to me that I'm also a cartoonist, and I used to create some stuff. I'm still doing it on and off. And just quickly to show that one of my stuff, which I didn't share, it's not part of the slides there in the presentation, but in this Strapazin, this magazine published from Zurich, this one of the comic 8-pager story which I did on one of the political issue in India, which it's in German, so I translated it, but I'm really not nowadays very comfortable to show this kind of stuff maybe online. So that is the situation now. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for sharing. I want to jump right into our discussion. I think everyone here in their introductions, they mentioned something along the lines of wearing multiple hats, wearing multiple hats in your profession. I'd really love to know for the audience, where are you finding your inspiration, and what is that process of turning inspiration into the physical medium that we see today in comics and illustrations? And Patrick, if you might start us off, I know you have to actually leave us in 15 minutes because you have a deadline to do exactly that. So if you could start us off, talk us a little bit about what is that process of creation for you from inspiration to page, and I'll open up to the rest of the panelists.
Well, as a political cartoonist, it's a very boring process that I'm going to describe to you, and that nobody's going to envy me. But it's true that I'm sorry that later on I will have to leave you to go to the kitchen because it's on the kitchen table that I tend to install myself to for the first phase of my work, which is to look for ideas when I have a topic. Well, I don't have my topic yet. I don't have the theme of the day. And that takes some research and browsing and talking sometimes with the newsroom. But once I have my topic, I like to allow myself 2 hours. 2 hours to come up with, let's say, 4, 5, 6 different ideas and sketches with different approaches, as I previously described. You know what? Very often, in most cases, maybe let's say 55% of the cases, it's the first idea that is the best. But in some cases, maybe 25% of the cases, it's the last one. So it's still worth going through the whole process for me and looking up for different ideas, even though my day gets much longer with that. And then I like to allow myself 2 hours to do the final cartoon. In between the two processes, I like to, because that's a conversation. I'm lucky to be still working with newsrooms. As you say, Sharad, this work is disappearing, not only in India, but in a lot of places. There are less and less positions of political cartoonists. The big news conglomerate Gannett in the United States announced that they would be scrapping editorial pages in their publications, and along with them, political cartoons. And Gannett owns, I think, 25% of the newspapers in the United States. So that's a huge loss for my profession. But I'm still working with newsrooms, and I like to have some interaction with them. So I send out my sketches, I get feedbacks, I have a sort of panel of journalists, and they vote on my sketches, and then we have a conversation. And this is democracy as I like it. I mean, I get the votes, and then I decide. That's the way it works. But it's a conversation I'm having, and it's the collective process of just thinking about why this idea, why is it good, why not this one? I like to have this part because we are all, I think, pretty lonely as cartoonists or comics writers. It's a lonely job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just being a creative individual can be extremely lonely sometimes. But I'd love to open it up to our other panelists. What is that inspiration? What inspiration are you seeking in your work, and how do you try to translate that into the medium that you work in?
Should I just hop in?
Yeah, please do.
I think for me, it's really interesting when, Patrick, you talk about process of making as being also part of the inspiration. And for me, it's often been about actually being part of real-time political shifts and being within those, things that are happening. And so much is happening in the country in the past few years that it's almost, it's pretty much at one's doorstep. So to be able to actually, it's almost part of like experiencing what's happening that begins where the process of making or ideating is for me, whether it's, the looking at hegemony and the kind of heteronormative patriarchy that's still so much part of social order every day. No matter what class or situation, whether it's urban or rural. And then there are these much larger political shifts of communalism, of an increasing divide in education and access to basic civic amenities. So it's almost like a response to what one is experiencing. And and the space for, at one level, yes, there's with your longer history, as Sharad is saying, of being a political cartoonist, you see the change in where you publish. But for me, practicing within the form in the past few years, and I would say 10 years or so, it's actually the opportunity is immense with having social media and publishing turned towards it, and even smaller support towards artists being able to do what they want to do, or collectives being able to come together to seek support. So actually there is both sides to it. And that's also an opportunity that gives inspiration, saying, oh, I'm not going to wait anymore for that sort of one space that it could be. It's about, also creating those outlets to where something can go. So it's also in what publishing could be, in opportunities to experiment with forms of publishing. That's really exciting in a country where, like in India, where the form isn't so established as yet. So it's almost up to everyone who creates to make what the form becomes. And so, that onus of a strong history of, political cartooning is colonial. So then what do you do? How else do you create that? And that's really exciting when I see other creators take to it, and in different languages, actually. It's yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Sharad, Arthy, do you want to add anything on inspiration to creation?
Yeah, I think, most of the stuff, political stuff, which I used to create and am still doing on and off is where I feel strongly about certain issues, especially if it is connected to some conflict issues, or communalism is one of the issue, and of course the political situation, which is really uh, uh, not very people very feel comfortable about certain things, and maybe the issues like LGBTQ issues, and people don't want to talk about those issues, adolescents health education issues, and so on. So my work is mostly around those issues where people are, there is hush hush on these issues, and there is people are really not very comfortable about to talk about on those issues. I remember one of the series which I started that was called Cow Cow on the, and there was no cow. In fact, there was a crow which was saying cow cow. But this story was going around the political situation long back, and one of the very reputed newspaper, they agreed to publish it, and they sent me the dummy copies and everything. And then just after that, next week, they said, okay, my editor is not comfortable with this idea. And I'm not going to name this newspaper, but you will be shocked to hear the name of this newspaper. And that is unfortunately the situation, which is very disheartening for people who are creating some stuff, and they find, okay, maybe these are few limited platforms which are going to publish it somewhere. So, but anyways, we need to continue to publish, create our stuff and self-publish it. So what we are doing, where we are getting our inspiration is probably sending it to people and sharing it in close groups, and also working with the communities, especially working with the marginalized communities, with the diverse group, and getting to know their stories and probably help them to document those stories. And this kind of work is also very overwhelming in a way that you can help people to document these stories. I remember during the peak of this CA and RC issue, I was doing workshop with the Rohingyas communities, and they were going to be the first target of this uh, uh, new law. But that time it was so difficult for us to find a place where we could publish our anthology and also release it somewhere in the center of the town in the Delhi. So we decided to release this book within that shelter home in the Rohingyas refugees camp. And these people, they were so happy to see that their stuff is published in a book, and that was really very inspiring for us. It was really very fulfilling to see at least some of the people are really happy. And there were some of the media houses, they started like writing reviews on those stories later on. So in a way, I find there is like, at least if you have different type of a product which you can really show it to people, so people, maybe you can find some spaces, maybe you can find some way to distribute those stuff, and then open up the real kind of debate which you are really looking for.
Yeah, thank you. I driving down on this question a little bit more, I think Sharad and Patrick, you both touched upon something very interesting, and that's the landscape is changing. It's changing for creators, it's changing for newspapers, and it's changing for our audience. But my question would be why? Do you really think it's the appetite of readers that have changed? Are there other forces that are changing what we consume and why, specifically to this medium. Anyone wants to give this a shot?
Can I just answer in just 2 lines quickly?
Yeah, please.
So I think, yes, the issue is that there was a time when the first Prime Minister of India, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he used to call cartoonists and say, like cartoonist Shankar, and say, Shankar, please don't spare me. And he was open to criticism. And now we have a time where after 60 years of some of these cartoons drawn by the same cartoonist, they were like part of some of the textbook, and there was such a hue and cry on those cartoons. So what is really happening that because we have handful of cartoonists, the appetite to consume that kind of critic or humor or satire is really not much, and that appetite we need to increase. We need more and more cartoonists. We need more and more people who can draw their stuff. And that's why I thought, if I am not drawing myself or not publishing my own stuff, let me create maybe 100,000 hands and let everybody draw their story, everybody tell their story. It is easy to stop 4 or 5 people or silence 4 or 5 voices, but maybe it is not easy. And also one more interesting point here is that when you have more people, you get multiple narratives, and it's not only on behalf of the like certain community. There are writers or artists who are writing or creating content on it. But if you are providing a tool to communicate your story, I mean, you will get multiple narrative, and that is the beautiful, I think, solution to this issue.
I love this idea of having more and more new voices, and I want to lend my voice to Arthy or Ita and listen to your point of view.
I mean, if I can just add to Sharad's point, which of course we have seen a changing appetite, but I think the other thing that guides consumption is the algorithm. And I feel like that's played such a crucial and the role has kind of changed at different points, but I feel like it dictates a lot of what people consume, and now almost negatively.
Yeah, Arthy, can you add 2 more sentences for the audience? What is this algorithm you're referring to, and how is it shaping what we're...
Right. So the social media algorithm, which is basically, put in place by the social media platforms, and and there are many factors at play as to how that algorithm is created, but it's generally created with the intent of increasing people's time on that platform and not necessarily engaging in any meaningful way. And we've seen people's attention span kind of dwindle over time, and just content has become something that is just consumed at an alarming rate. But I don't know whether that translates into anything meaningful.
Yeah, thank you. Any other, Ita, please.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about what Arthy is also saying about algorithm and how do we do this bit of reach, because Sharad's kind of talking about, this one method that, has been repeated over and over going into community. And then there's also social media. And I was thinking about how, like in my work, there's this community endeavor of going out and, working with comics and children creating their comics. And in the past 2 years, it's been in this book that I made on Shaheen Bagh and the protest, the same site has been a space where I've worked with children and making their comics and their stories and, doing exhibitions within the community. And there's not just children from the Muslim community. There's also, as Sharad was saying, there's Rohingya refugees around the same area. So, what are your experiences? How can we put these up there? But, it's interesting, and especially in a country which is so diverse, and that there are so many groups of people interested in media and what to do with engagement, that it's not one or the other. And that's what's so exciting. So even with a book, what's been really nice is to be able to even take that into different spaces, right? So if there's this graphic narrative in which, for me, the process was to do interviews and then to come back and say I'm the creator in this, it doesn't end there. That's one part of what a book is, or what the process of being working with the book is. It doesn't begin only at its first page and end with its last. There's relationships that form when making a graphic narrative over a year and a half, with the people that I'm working with the organizations, NGOs in that space. And then what happens with the journey of the book once it's done, because it's in real time and it's affecting, it's about political changes, it's about growing communalism. So to be able to take that back into, say, the spaces where I've come, done interviews, to be able to take that back into, say, a community learning center within Shaheen Bagh and use the space of a book as a locator for dialogue, is for me really exciting with what can happen, especially with comics, because people feel like they can add their stories to it. It's not just giving information, but it's really tangible. It's also a book that's in black and white and really simple, kind of not heavy drawing or heavy text. So it's easy to work with and think around for a younger age group or an older. And also this bit with language is interesting because, there's this understanding of how there's this English speaking audience and they do graphic narratives. But when I go into Shaheen Bagh, actually there's a lot of people in Delhi who maybe grapple with language, but they want to, and they speak English in some or the other way. There's this broken English going on. So when one is doing a book and a publisher says, oh, we have to begin with one language, it has to be English, it doesn't mean that it is only, the book can be pushed out. You can do things with the book and take its spaces. And that's an opportunity in India because we have such a network of NGOs, of community learning centers, of activists, and it's really alive at the moment. Using social media, going out there and working with people. And when there's been a divide in education, there's also been community learning centers that have come up, and activists in places saying, we are going to take this work on because the government will fall at some time, but in that time we're going to take on work. So I see that happening with comics artists, with even visual artists taking to social media and doing that. So yeah, I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. I think all of us here can agree that these social issues is such an instrumental part of our work and drives a lot of what we do. I'd be curious to know, in your own fields, why does comics or cartoons add to this discussion? How does it actually enhance and foster that communication and sharing and storytelling with an audience? Like, what can this field specifically do that maybe other typical methods of storytelling or reporting or cartooning, or storytelling can't do?
So for me, the fight has been into the world of the media, of traditional media, for the last, as I said, 25, 30 years, to try to first convince editors and then convince the audiences and get them to understand the seriousness of comics, of the language of comics, and how well suited it is to tell news stories and to report on what's going on. They have a unique capacity, comics, to bring the reader, to take the reader by the hand and bring you into the situation that is being depicted. Totally unique to comics. There is nothing that can match the possibility comics give you to be on the field with me as a reporter, or with Joe Sacco when he goes to Gorazde or to Palestine, and to be in empathy with the people he's speaking to, with the victims he's talking to, because of the form, the very simple form of the black and line, the black and the white and black and white line, the very simple form of cartooning is something that gets away with the complexity of images and videos and all those images of the news that are hard to watch and of which we have a hard time making sense. We have a hard time making sense of the images that are flowing on us. And we have a hard time sympathizing, actually, because we put a distance between ourselves and those situations. But the magic of cartooning and of the simple drawing is that it allows you to connect. and to connect not only with the narrator, but with the protagonist of the story. And it's not telling a story from the point of view of an expert, top down, but it's going really onto the field and giving a voice to the people affected. Like you go to Gaza, when I go there during the end of a conflict, I mean, it's still war, but it's a ceasefire. I'm able to get into there. I'm not going to go to see the Hamas leaders. I'm going to go to see the people in a little community, the people on the streets, and the little organizers and the first helpers, and really to give a sense of the feeling on the ground, to give a sense of of what people are experiencing on the human level, experiencing of the big news that we hear about in the media. So it's a unique power of the simple drawing.
Yeah, Ita, Sharad, Arthy, do you have more to add?
So I think this comics is the way we are doing it is a very, very non-violent and non-threatening medium of communication. For most of the people, I think, especially when there was time when the street plays were very popular in the communities, and what we realize over the period of time when people are creating their own stuff, they are self-publishing, distributing locally. You are really not asking anyone to stop, read, or you have to go to high decibel to reach out to the people and read out your message loud. So what is really happening over the period of time when the people will develop this habit of reading something which is being pasted somewhere, like we had a regular fortnightly, monthly published comics newspapers, and these wall newspaper they used to publish on the like specific location on the notice boards, comics notice boards. So most of the people, they developed this habit and they were like aware of that something is going to come like every Monday or next fortnight, new poster will come. And who are the creator? This is the stuff which is not like in Mizoram. If you are creating something, there is no one from the Delhi or Mumbai or Kolkata is publishing or drawing these stuff, but the local people from Champai to Lunglai district, they are creating their stuff. So, the ownership, when you have the ownership on the content, you are tend to read this, you are tend to like glued to this content. And then not only that people are like on the, they are reading the stuff, or they are at the receiving end, but they are also like contributor of the story. Like it happens in most of the places where there was this regular distribution was happening, many of these local people not only will pick those comics because they have some local significance or local issues were raised by the local people, by the person who is living next door. So here the case is the artist is not coming from anywhere. Artist is also known to the audience, is living in the same community next door, or my son or daughter. So now the acceptability is much more than the stuff which is coming from outside. And this is the beauty of this stuff, when people are creating, coming together, finding solution, opening up discussion. And this is one of the form of the power of this medium was unfortunately unexplored. The way we started in the grassroots comics. I noticed somebody was asking in the question answer box, what is the grassroots comics? It's simple comics drawn by the people themselves and non-artists. And our ABCD is also like anybody can draw. So people are coming without any like Arthy was talking about, like, okay, good drawing or bad drawing. There is nothing like when people come and they draw something and you encourage them, they feel like, okay, they can draw. So it is more about like using the line art, simple line art, and communicating your ideas. And once you will do it only for once, like this person in Tamil Nadu, now he was there in my workshop 2 months back. Now he's such a pain because he's every like second day he's sending new comics to us. And he's like got the idea that, okay, now I can draw. So So once you will get this idea that you can draw and you can communicate your idea, you want to stop.
Yeah. Ita, Arthy, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I think I've been thinking about what it is that, with this having done this really long process for the first time of sitting with the book day after day of making and what it means later is this thing of, non-fiction, yes, and there is reportage. But what's interesting for me in comics is that the way of handling that fact or the this was or this is happening, this kind of non-fiction fact-based evidence-based kind of thing that's there, the way of dealing and handling it is actually, there's a lot of fiction that's involved with that, with the way that story is being told. And that's not to say that the fact or that this was reduces, but that there's a play between how it's being dealt with and that which we're referring to. And for me, that's really, really the space in which process can happen and in which holds my attention almost as a maker. So even if it's, a one-page comic, for me, it's really interesting in terms of what it is that the drawing and the leaving out bits of information or adding or breaking time within the frames, what is it that does to adding and playing with what it is that is there. And comics does that really playfully because it also says, even though this is now what the artist is saying or what I'm doing to that fact, it also doesn't have to end with that. It's an offer also to somebody else to say, oh, so you can do this too, and you can play with it more, and you can remember what you remember and recall and add to it what you feel. And I think that's essential to be able to deal with and think beyond what is happening, because that's what we would need to do. There is violence at stake, there is oppressive regimes, but we're not only wanting to see that in interesting ways, we're also wanting to think beyond it. And that's the kind of space which I feel is urgently required at the moment within a lot of the world, actually, is the space to be able to think together of what could be. And comics could offer that in one direction. And the other thing with my work in Outreach, the NGO, we're kind of working right now with a lot of organizations, government schools, community schools, because there's this increasing gap in the last 2 years in education, in the access to schooling in India. Because when education went online, a majority of children, urban, rural, lost their 2 years of school. And suddenly we're being reached out to by the state government in Delhi, by organizations, by rural schools saying teachers don't know what to do, you know. And we work with comics and visual storytelling, and we're suddenly finding that these are the ways that re-entering learning spaces works better than throwing children back into school and saying, okay, now you pick up where you left off. It's not working. So actually, comics suddenly becomes this tool in which you're not saying only learn reading and writing again or about the world, but you're also saying this is a space children can engage with and express what they're thinking about something that you're learning, and then re-enter more formal learning spaces. So I think that's really interesting at the moment, and what I'm seeing, every day. We're working with thousands of children across, again, the country, in Bihar, in Delhi, in NCR, working with educators to say this is something that you could do. So, yeah.
If I could just add another point, which is that, I mean, in between film and comics, and that's these two mediums that I work in. And what I find very interesting about comics is the ability to take a visual pause. In film, even though the image is very intentional, you do go through it in real time. But with comics, you have the ability to just stop if something strikes you and stay with it. And I find that amazing.
That is very true.
Absolutely
that is very true. And that what differentiates, for example, comics journalism with other forms of reporting. And if you compare it to video, because it's very visual, you can indeed pause and get all the emotions. And then you can also go back a few panels and then come back to the story. So you can really read the stories with your own rhythm. And that's a big advantage. But Varud, I'm just checking my email and I see that the Boston Globe is looking for me. If you don't mind, do you want me to address quickly some of the questions that are specifically alluding to political cartoons or to myself?
Yes, I've been particularly trying to ask more questions, so you can't leave. But at this moment, please go ahead. I actually, one, it's in the question and answer, and I think one's great for you. But we talk about connecting. I think you talked about comics as a great way of connecting. There's one question on humor in connection. And humor, yes, is a great way of connecting. I know you believe humor is an important aspect of your reporting, but how do you balance that, the bias or the comedy of the humor to what needs to be represented in a social issue?
It's a very tricky question, and it's at the center of many debates and controversies. And Sharad alluded to the fact that humor is not very much is not very trendy right now. I mean, I know, and I could see that in India. You need to navigate the complexities of a multi-ethnic society. It's very easy to hurt someone's feelings, and or to make some particular group angry. So sensitivities are very easily triggered. We know that there are many possibilities of misunderstanding, and the space for humor is questioned. It's a tricky place. But still, we need to find, first we need more voices, not less voices. Whenever there is a social media storm about such or such humorist or such political satirist or that particular cartoon, I want to, and you have people tempted to get that content censored, and you have editors who have less and less appetite for controversy. Whenever that happens, I want to say we need more voices. We don't need less voices. We need more point of views, more humor, not less humor, really. Because let's not forget that's also humor is also what allows us to live together and to live on this planet, on this crazy planet, and to make sense of this crazy and stupid world, and also to make fun of first of ourselves. I think any person from any given background and point of view first is making humor about themselves, and then also in relationship with the others, other groups, other genders, whatever. But it's that is communication. We are communicating our point of view, and there is a question like that alluding to the memes. It's been often said or asked if the memes are the new form of political cartooning. You know, if political cartooning is something from the past, and now we have the memes. And I want to say, well, guys, really? Memes are funny. You can share them, but they actually remind me why political cartoons are important, because we live in a world, and we mentioned social media, of manipulation and fake news. Let's not be naive about that. And humor is being used as a tool of politicization and of communication by some groups, and memes are being produced really to you don't know who produced them, you don't know what is their goal, but they are using humor to make a point. And so the memes are a tool of propaganda like others. Whereas the good thing with an author, a comics writer or a political cartoonist, is that it's honest. You know who speaks, from what point of view. And of course, there's another question about bias. How did you differentiate your bias from your job? I mean, your bias is actually at the center of your work. You have a point of view. It is personal. It is subjective, and people know you for that. It's very honest, and I think in this age of fake news, we need honest voices. We need more and more voices, not less voices.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Patrick. If you have to leave us, please now, I think would be the best one. Thank you very much for joining in.
would you excuse me? And I just want to say to Ita and Arthy and Sharad and yourself, Varud, I love your work. Keep up the good work. It's wonderful what you're doing. I've browsed through your stuff and I've seen very exciting things, and I love your initiatives. So keep up the good work, and I hope to be in Mumbai soon for real.
Yeah, take care.
Take care, all of you.
Okay, thank you.
I want to keep with the same vein of conversation. The idea that in storytelling, we are all trying to balance entertainment and education, right? Like we are trying to do both in this primary vehicle. Humor can be one way of connecting with the audience. Are there other forms of connection that you have found in your work that tend to work well, maybe specific to Indian audiences that have, as Sharad has mentioned, a reduced appetite for humor these days? What are other ways of connecting and balancing that line of bringing a point, a social issue across, and the entertainment aspect as well that goes with any story?
I mean, that's quite a question. I'm still thinking about the previous point, which was about memes, and I personally love memes. I think they challenge authorship in interesting ways, and I think that's another interesting conversation to have about, the creative process. And yes, they are propaganda, but I mean, sometimes propaganda needs counter propaganda, and it's a very democratic process of producing large volumes of yeah. And maybe that connects to the question that you just asked, which is, like how can people engage with different kinds of emotions? And I think when people want to engage and find themselves wanting to say something, but maybe not having certain skills at their disposal, or and memes have come up very organically as a way to take part in that discussion.
Yeah, I think there is actually, as Arthy is also saying, there is this diversity of form that's happening. I mean, there is also a threat to, humor being taken as humor, because there's so much interrogation that happens with the possibility of, attacking on social media. That's something that's made it more threatening for anybody to put out what they put out. So there's also a lot of what happens nowadays that's self-censoring, and that's definitely something that is at play. One notices it, one feels it. There is threat that's real in India today for freedom of expression. That's all true. But at the same time, I mean, I also think that there is a big appetite for uh, various forms of new media, and comics, I feel, is one of those. It is growing, and at those different levels, from education, from a tool within outreach in the various developing kind of sector work, to graphic narratives and longer form books, because they take on that kind of voice of opposition. And that is a growing space. It's not something that will ever completely reduce. It'll always, I mean, India loves to debate, and India loves to have multiple voices, and they always find their way. They push through the cracks, always. So and then there are these big events that happen. There are Shaheen Bagh, there is the farmers protest that happened, and they crack through, and those are it's not different from what alternative media and what artists do. In a way, these are it's from events like this that you also say, oh, so it's possible to speak up against things that are happening, or voice opinion against bigger regimes at play or censorship. And so I think it's about finding new forms, and also this kind of battle against attacks and censorship. And self-publishing is increasing. It's amazing how within the NGO network, as well as in urban subcultures, this formulation of zines, self-publishing in different languages, again, by independent artists, by women artists. One of the things that I was thinking when we were discussing, and I will bring in here quickly, is that when we look at the legacy of political cartoonists and that vanishing, I often find it hard to remember who the legacies of women and queer political cartoonists are vanishing. Which legacy is that is we're afraid of, losing?
Yeah, that's a great point. We're nearing the last 5 minutes, and one thing that I like to think about as a creator is like when we get a platform, of sharing that platform with other creators. And so while I'm asking a few questions from the Q&A, if our other panelists wouldn't mind, if you would write down maybe 3 to 4 names of other creators or other comics that you would recommend to the audience, we can include it for further reading for those watching in, and it can also go up on the recording once the session is there. And in the meantime, Ita, to that exact point, we have a question from Maitri. Where are the women political cartoonists, and what are the barriers to women becoming political cartoonists?
Yeah, I think Arthy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say actually it depends on where you look. There are many online right now who have like tremendous reach. Rachita Taneja of Sanitary Panels comes to mind, who's been a very powerful voice. There are many people working like that in their own way to kind of produce political work. And another project that I've been doing is a kind of research project on the history of Indian comics with Arun Prasad, who is a comic archivist and collector. And we've come across amazing works by people like Maya Kamath. From Pakistan, we have Nigar Nazar, who created Gogi. And I think it's also a question of there's not much known about these people. And that's where, we decided to kind of start this research project and look into that a little bit more. But at the same time, I think now with the internet, with social media, the space is fast expanding.
Yeah, perfect. A new face has joined us, so I know my time is wrapping up slowly. Maybe we don't have time to put it in the chat boxes, but really quickly, I want to elevate voices around us. So Arthy, you mentioned a few names, Ita and Sharad. Do you also have any names, readings that come to mind? Please share them for the audience before we wrap up.
Yeah, quickly, there's for diverse comics makers, there's been two anthologies called First Hand Graphic Nonfiction in India, published by Captain Bichli Comics and Yoda Press, and those bring reportage comics across the board. And I also think just in making comics, it's looking at comics makers from all across the world. So if two people that I look at for learning and what I want to do with the form is Alison Bechdel and Joe Sacco. And that's really, what I do with the form is always looking back at these two.
Yeah, perfect. Sharad, do you have any departing names for us before I have to give up the reins of this conversation?
Yeah, I would say that there are lots of interesting independent cartoonists doing their stuff. But one of the online platform cartoon movement, which is my favorite, I think people can go there. This website is publishing lots of good stuff, especially the not only the single frame cartoons, but the long narratives. So this is one of my favorite.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. It's an inspiration for me to be here myself and have a conversation with you. And I believe I am finally up. Please, also take it away.
Thank you, Varud, for so skillfully handling this conversation. I mean, I thought this panel was so fantastic with, so many practitioners from such talented practitioners within the space. Firstly, you called me a new face, so I'm most offended by that. Sorry. We've known each other for now quite a few years. So, but honestly, I think, if we could have done this in person, would have been another whole thing. But I think a 2.0 version of this would be workshops. Avid is known for workshopping many of its programs. I think that would be a fantastic next steps to this conversation. But thank you to the panel and to Varud. I mean, he's as I mentioned, a regular collaborator of Avid's. We call him whenever we need him. And now that he's living in the Big Apple, we'll have to call him a little less, but that's not going to stop us. But thank you to our partners, the Swiss Consulate, to Consulate General Otmar Hartiger and Maitri for collaborating with us and always being sharing resources, which is very, very kind and also helps us curate and program plans. And thank you most of all to our audiences. I know life has restarted in many parts of the world and cities. But thank you so much for joining us on this online session. And just, stay in touch. Avid doesn't sleep, as you may know, and we have many, many programs. Our next one will probably be next week. For that, you just have to stalk us on social media or check our website at avidlearning.in. But thank you once again, and remember that learning never stops. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.